Horman case. It's been 9 years since the little boy disappeared from Skyline School in Northwest Portland. It's a story that we've been following very closely through the years, and I hope to answer some of your questions. This comes in light of a report we had this morning talking about a book that will be coming out later this year. Kyron's mother, Desiree Young, has been working with a best-selling author for about 2 years now on a book that will be released later this year. It's called Love You Forever, The Search for Kyron Horman. And she spoke with us at length at her Medford home about the book, about how she hopes to set the record straight about the disappearance of her son, and also the woman that she thinks is responsible, Kyron Horman's stepmother, Terry Horman. Before I get too much into the details about the book and what Desiree has been sharing with us, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the case itself, because as I'd mentioned, it's been 9 years now, if you can believe that. It was June 4th, 2010. I was actually going through my files, and it's a case, like I said, that we've been covering closely. I mean, this is a portion of what I have at my desk following the Kyron Horman case. And you look back, and it all started with really a flyer showing his name and face. It was one of Oregon's largest search efforts ever, looking for this little boy. He had gone to a school science fair, and this was a photo that his stepmom took of him in front of his project, probably the last image that we have of Kyron Horman. Description of him, and also Multnomah County Sheriff's Office seeking information or tips. I reached out to him just yesterday. They said the investigation is continuing, though they've been pretty tight-lipped and really have not released a lot of information about the disappearance and or the ongoing investigation, short of saying it is continuing. But you look back, and it does remind us kind of how big a case this was. This was the Oregonian newspaper that particular weekend, Police FBI Hunt for Portland Boy, and little did we know that this search would continue on and have such unusual twists and turns over the years. Another headline, and this came out shortly after, and this was dealing specifically with the stepmom, Terry Horman. In talking with Desiree Young, Kyron's mom, she really does feel like it's important to put the pressure on Terry Horman, who incidentally has never been named as a suspect, never been arrested. There have been no arrests in this case. And again, when we talk about the unusual twists and turns in this case, a lot of it has to do as well with the divorce proceedings, because shortly after Kyron Horman disappeared, the family stood together united, and it's a blended family. His parents, biological parents, have been separated. They stood together united, and in talking with Desiree Young, she talked about how very quickly there was mounting suspicion about the stepmom, Terry Horman. And that family, while they stood together, behind the scenes they were divided. Terry Horman, the stepmom, admitted to the fact that she failed some lie detector tests early in the investigation. There were some questions about her whereabouts at the time that Kyron disappeared. She'd taken him to the science fair and then left the school grounds to run some errands. And we have some idea of where she may have been, going to a Fred Meyer store, a dry cleaner, some other locations as well, and driving around that Northwest Portland area, which, if you're not familiar, is very rural and rugged. There's a lot of open space. There's farmland. And then she and her husband, Kane, waited for the school bus that night, not knowing that Kyron wouldn't be there, they said at the time. And indeed, he didn't show up, and that's really what initiated this search effort. Desiree also suggested that Terry made some unusual statements, didn't seem particularly concerned about Kyron's whereabouts in the days following his disappearance. We now know through the divorce proceedings there were some unusual behaviors. She allegedly was sexting with another man in the days following Kyron's disappearance. And then the real bombshell came later that month when Kane Horman, her husband, filed for divorce and restraining order. He claimed that police had given him information to suggest that Terry was responsible for Kyron's disappearance. Additionally, he claimed that Terry solicited the family landscaper to have him killed, her estranged husband Kane killed. This all came out in court papers. It played out in a really messy divorce that we covered day in and day out. Finally, the divorce was resolved. She moved to Medford, got a defense lawyer, tried to change her name on several occasions, has since moved to California now, remarried, and it's all outlined in our digital story, which I would encourage you to read to get the latest information about the case, because it really has taken some unusual twists and turns. But at the end of the day, I always remind people that the most important thing, while this story is unusual, is remembering that it's all about this little boy and finding this little boy. If you've got questions, I'll go ahead and take those now and try and answer those as best I can. Jared here is kind of monitoring them. He's probably better suited to look at the messages and the questions than I am. So I'll kind of turn to him for questions. But Jared, you're starting to see some questions from folks at home, and what do they have to say?
Yeah, we have a lot of comments so far. One question so far from Cindy Edwards, and it's based on what you were just talking about. She wants to know, why is Terry still free?
So Terry Horman has not been charged with a crime. The closest that we've seen is in court papers when a judge described her as the, quote, prime suspect, end quote. That's the closest that law enforcement or any officials have come to naming her as a person of interest or a suspect is in those court proceedings when she was described as a prime suspect. She's gone on national television, the Dr. Phil show. She's given interviews to People magazine saying she didn't do it. She doesn't know what happened to Kyron. I've reached out to her on multiple occasions, in person, by email, by U.S. mail, by phone, through friends. I mean, I've gone to incredible lengths to try and reach Terry Horman, to interview her, sit down, and get her side of the story, and never heard back, or she's declined, along with members of her family. She's now living in California. Records suggest she recently bought a house. She's remarried, using the last name Vasquez now. So we're aware of where she is. There were some legal troubles down in California after she moved there. This was about a year or so ago. She was charged with some misdemeanor crimes. Those were dismissed, or she was found not guilty. And so at this point, she's living in California, and as far as we know, has no contact with her biological daughter. So when she and Kane were married, they had a young daughter. After the divorce and restraining order, she moved to Medford and didn't have any contact with her biological daughter. As far as we know, there's no visitation. She cut off relations like that, and to this day has no relationship with that daughter. A number of people have kind of looked at that and said, well, that may be reason for suspicion as well. But again, she has never been charged and has not been arrested in any way. So she's certainly been the focus of this investigation, though, for many people.
So there's several other questions. We'll just go through them here. Marilee Welch wants to know, why wasn't she arrested for trying to hire a hitman?
Right. So the question is, why wasn't she arrested for trying to hire a hitman? Again, this all came out during divorce proceedings and the restraining order. That was part of the justification for the restraining order that Kane, her husband, took out against her. Police investigated it. This landscaper was called as a witness during the divorce proceedings. There's a lengthy debate in the divorce proceedings, if you look at the legal papers, about what he could testify about, because there was some concern that he might, along with other witnesses, might compromise the ongoing criminal investigation. So there's a real struggle about how much information he could share. I've reached out to that landscaper on multiple occasions and actually spoken with him by phone. He's not been willing to go on the record, not been willing to talk about it. As far as why they haven't charged her with that particular crime, maybe a conspiracy to commit type crime, we don't know. I mean, that's really a question for prosecutors, and they haven't commented, nor have police. So it's still kind of outstanding. Those allegations, again, came during the divorce proceedings. We've certainly heard about them, but as far as hearing from officials about that, we haven't heard anything, and there have been no charges related to that claim.
Brianna Jane has two questions. She wants to know if anyone has been charged with any crimes in this case, and then she also wants to know, when was the last accurate clue that was followed up on, and was there any result?
So no one has ever been charged in connection with this case. In regards to the latest clues, we don't have access to that information. All we can do is ask investigators, and they say the investigation is ongoing. I can tell you, in speaking with Desiree, she says the investigation is very active. And I put air quotes around that, but she says it's been more active in the past 2 years than it has been in quite some time. She says there have been recent searches, recent being within the past 9 months, at new undisclosed locations, so maybe areas we are not that familiar with and we don't know where they've been searching. These are typically ground searches where they have search and rescue crews come in and do kind of like a grid search or search through an area looking for anything that may be of value. She suggested there's new evidence in this case, new computer evidence, new phone evidence. We don't know specifically what they have. We do know that technology has changed considerably. I mean, we read these news accounts about new technology and how they are helping investigators, and I've got to believe that they're applying those same technologies in this case as well, although we don't have access and we don't know exactly what police are doing, but we do know phone and computer activity. They're looking at that, and that may provide some type of clue for investigators.
So you kind of just answered Connie, I'm sorry if I get this name right, Sikowski's question. She wanted to know, are leads still coming in all these years later?
Yeah.
And then Lily Marie Huffman, kind of off of what you were just talking about, she said she's confused. She thought there was a breakthrough in this case. You just talked about some of the new developments. She feels like there's nothing new happening. What other new news is there?
Sure. So first, in regards to the tips, are there new tips coming in? According to Desiree, Kyron's mother, there are tips that continue to come in all the time. And I think that's really important as well, that if anybody has information about Kyron Horman, to call the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. While this has been a fascinating case to cover, and there have been all kinds of unusual twists and turns, at the end of the day, police and Kyron's family believes what's going to bring him home is somebody coming forward with information. And so police really do encourage people, if you have any information about Kyron Horman, who disappeared 9 years ago in northwest Portland, to please call them. No matter how small that tip may be, it may be of value. In regards to new information about this case, again, in talking with Desiree Young, a year ago she had alluded that something was coming, and today she reveals what that is. She's been working on a book with a best-selling author to kind of tell her story, and as part of this book, and as part of our reporting, she has outlined some additional details about where the investigation stands now, and also raising questions about the stepmother, Terry Horman, and some what she describes as suspicious activities shortly after Kyron disappeared, and really trying to put the pressure, I think, and she admits this, putting the pressure on Terry to maybe come forward and share what information she has. Because that's one thing as well, throughout all this, Terry Horman, after getting a defense lawyer, has not been speaking with police and sharing a lot of information. And I think the family would like that to happen.
Joanna Horn and Marie Lauterbach both want to know why won't Kane allow law enforcement to dig up his property?
That's a good question, and I don't know even the accuracy of that. I've kind of heard this and seen this in some blog posts. As far as I know, Kane has been cooperative with law enforcement throughout the years, and certainly been public in trying to get Kyron's face out there. There's an annual car show where he's out there with a booth and trying to raise awareness about his missing son. So I've got to believe that he continues to be cooperative to this day. In my communication with him, he is very adamant that he wants Kyron to be found. We'll do what is necessary to allow that to happen.
Melissa Robinson wants to ask, where is the dad in this story? I guess that's what we just talked about.
Yeah, Kane Horman, the father. He's spoken with us on numerous occasions and continues to be in communication with me. He still lives in the area, is still very passionate about finding his son and very concerned about his well-being, along with his daughter, who he cares for.
Joanna Horn asks if he had Kyron's Wall of Hope removed and why.
So the Wall of Hope, it was taken down, I want to say a couple years ago. So for those of you not familiar, shortly after Kyron disappeared, at Skyline School there's a chain link fence. And a lot of people use that as a place to think about Kyron and show their concern. And so they put up all these signs and banners and flowers, stuffed animals. At some point the school said, listen, this is a school, we can't have all this. So they moved it down the road to a fire station, and it continued to hold all these mementos. Then the fire station said, listen, we can't have this here all the time. So then they moved it to a gym in the Beaverton area, and it stayed there for quite a while. And there were, teddy bears and toys and banners, signs, and unfortunately just the weather had its effect, and a lot of that material was kind of deteriorating. It didn't look great. And so a lot of those items were removed. I can tell you, though, in visiting Desiree at her home down in Medford, there's actually a part of her garden in the backyard that she's dedicated to some of those mementos. And so some of those belongings that were once at the Wall of Hope now sit in her backyard at a nice little area with a bench and some some things to remind her of Kyron. Not that she needs any additional reminders. I mean, it's something she's living with. But in her backyard, there's a really nice, quiet area where a lot of those items now live.
Lawrence O'Keefe asks, was there a friend of Terry's that refused to talk with investigators who was supposed to be with Terry that day?
Yeah. So DeeDee Spicer is the woman's name. Again, she has never been charged. She has never been named as a suspect. She came into this investigation probably, or at least our awareness of her, this was about a month or two after Kyron disappeared. And her name surfaced because she was very close friends, best friends with Terry Horman. They had communicated and been in communication throughout this entire process. She was gardening nearby that particular day, and there were questions about her whereabouts during that same time period. So a lot of people wondered if maybe she was involved or had some connection with Terry during the day of Kyron's disappearance and could in some way be related to this case. She was called before a grand jury in Multnomah County to testify. She took the fifth, didn't share information at that time. After that, there was some talk of maybe the fact that she had been given immunity and would then share some information. But again, still a lot of questions about her role, not only that day, but also potentially in the ongoing investigation. I've tried to talk with her on multiple occasions, have not been successful in doing so, including right outside the courthouse, asking her questions with the microphone and the camera repeatedly and getting nothing. I've also written letters to her and called. She now lives in Southern Oregon. And really, her name has not surfaced in the past few years as somebody that has been the focus of any type of investigation. She was just one of these individuals that it was part of the story early on, and there was a lot of speculation and suspicion, but ultimately we haven't seen or heard from her in quite some time.
We'll ask two more questions, and then we'll need to wrap it up.
Uh-huh.
What areas have they searched? Shannon C. Walcott Clump wants to know that, and do they plan any searches in the future?
My understanding is there are some searches planned. I don't know when. I don't know exactly where. I do know that as far as where the searches have occurred, they've primarily been focused in the area surrounding the school. And when I say surrounding the school, I don't mean like on the school grounds. This is if the school were to be the focus and then you're to move outward. And if you've been in that area at all, you know it's very hilly, it's very rugged. There's open fields, then there's high trees, and then you go down to kind of Sauvie Island. And there was some belief early on that cell phone pings led police towards the area of Sauvie Island. That area has a lot of water. There's a channel there. There are some lakes and ponds in there as well. We've seen searches occur in the past. And then the highway there, which is very busy, we've seen law enforcement conducting searches within the past 3 to 4 years. So we've seen them out there before. They don't notify us. They don't say, hey, we're going to be searching this weekend. Oftentimes it's people in the community that say, hey, I see search and rescue out here today. That leads me to make calls. And frankly, law enforcement is the best place to call if you have tips or information. I'm certainly interested as well. It's a story that I've been covering passionately for the past 9 years. If there's something that you'd like to share with me about the investigation, feel free to email me or message me as well, because I'm always interested and always interested in looking to see what we can turn over, because end of the day, I think the entire community would agree that we want to find this little boy, Kyron Horman.
And the last question we'll end with Mitchell Couch. He asked this twice. He said, do you see any conclusion to this case anytime in the future?
I would like to see a conclusion. In talking with law enforcement and former prosecutors, these are people not directly involved in the case, they say really, it's going to take a couple things. It's going to take locating Kyron Horman, or it's going to take a confession of some kind. It's going to probably take one of those two things to resolve this case someday. And that's where we hope to be at some point. To me, it is remarkable that we've been here 9 years. I mean, I remember that day vividly, and that call that went out to parents saying Kyron Horman was reported missing and did not come home from school today. And that launched this huge search, and the FBI and police were out there for 10 days in what was described as the largest search effort ever in Oregon history. And it's a story that has attracted national, international news. It's a story that I think has tugged at a lot of people's heartstrings. I mean, as parents, you think about your own child and how devastating that would be, not knowing to this day what happened to them. As a final note, I mean, I'll hold his picture up one more time because I think this is so important, and also the book that Desiree has working on will be released later this year. But most importantly, remember this little boy 9 years later, and if you have any information, call the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you, and hopefully it'll allow Kyron's family the opportunity to bring him home and bring some closure to this case, and hopefully to find Kyron. Thank you.